Well, thanks for staying with Morning Live, and of course with good reason, because the next interview is one I've been looking forward to. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has filed papers in the Constitutional Court for a review application amid mounting pressure for him to resign following the release of the Section 89 report. Ramaphosa's lawyers are challenging an advisory panel's report that said that there may be a prima facie case to answer in relation to the theft of a large sum of US dollars from his Phala Phala farm in Limpopo in 2020. Now, there's been much reaction to this, and adding his voice is former Statistician-General Dr. Pali Lehohla, who in an opinion piece or analysis piece, however you want to look at it, in the Times Live, says that his understanding is that the brief to Justice Ngcobo was to implement his mandate based on the Section 89 rules and the guidelines provided, and thus has failed to find any fault with the assessment of the panel in executing its mandate. So Dr. Lehohla joins us now for a further discussion. Dr. Padi, it's always great to speak to you. Thanks so much for being with us here on Morning Live.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sakina. Thanks, viewers. We have a topical issue here away from the perennially topical of unemployment, poverty, inequality, and how much of the balance of that we are achieving as we are absorbed by high offices, indiscretions. It's a matter to be seen, and how we judge it.
And interesting, as you say, very topical, but very interesting at this point, how these political machinations are brought to bear and how it's all playing out. But what do you make of the president taking this matter on judicial review to the Constitutional Court?
Well, I mean, let's step back that the S89 parliamentary process is a process by which you look at the facts that are available and then say, is there a question to answer? And that's what Justice Ngcobo actually established, that there is a question to answer. Let me put it this way. During the height of the pandemic, the 350 rands allocations were stopped. They were stopped because social development and the Ministry of Finance said they have to establish who they are paying and that there are no double payments and so on. And people suffered. Now, on the question of Phala Phala, there is no identity of the person who has paid 580,000 rands, $580,000. The banking system actually stops payments when it establishes that you have additional income, even if it's 50 rand per day. It stops there at 350. So we are governed by the same financial system. The question is, what is the quality of mercy? What is the quality of justice? Where $580,000 gets paid and there's no identity of the person who paid this. And Justice Ngcobo's panel established that there is no identity of the person who has been paid. Surely, the discrepancy in our justice system is what Justice Ngcobo says there is a question to be answered by high office. And it is a legitimate, and there's nothing wrong, and I'm saying the president should not take this on review. Well, he is a subject of investigation at all times, material times. Cabinet, parliament has to put the executive on the stoop all the time, even when there's nothing suspected. That's when justice is seen to be done. Now, when there is something that's suspected, then it cannot be taken on review.
So just looking at what you've just told us, and saw this article in the Sky News on their page, and the man that we didn't seem to know his identity, this Mr. Hazim. So Sky News, they actually spoke to him, and they asked him the question that the panel also raises about why hasn't he collected the goods that he bought from Phala Phala almost 3 years on. And his answer to them, incidentally, is that it was because of COVID. But he has since asked for a refund, but that hasn't happened yet. But also, they asked him about how did he manage to come into the country with 580,000 US dollars cash. And his answer to that was, I suppose, a little more evasive. They asked him, how did you get that into the country? And he said, through the airport. And they said, but, you know, in terms of having to declare all of that money, and can you show us proof of declaration of that cash? And he said, no, you know, the matter is sub judice. So on the president's own version as well, that happens to be quite a sticking point, isn't it, when we look at how the rest of the citizenry is treated with regard to matters such as that and what has happened here?
Well, there is. I happened to be in Bloemfontein last week, and my taxi driver was telling me an interesting story about somebody who is a car washer. He washes cars, and every day he was saving 50 rands, and he was also receiving tares. The banks got the 50 rands, traced it, and said, this man has money, he is disqualified for tax. So the financial systems are so aggressive around compliance, even to the extent of depriving somebody from getting tax when he is actually having some 50 rands. Now, it is the same system that looks at our compliance in things like money laundering and so on. How can this one not fall under the same rubric, especially given the 1,000 times quantity compared to the 50 rand that this person who was a car washer had to be forced to forfeit the 350 rand? How can, at the same time, ignore this when people who were receiving 350 rands were stopped from receiving it because of due diligence by the banks, which failed then to this date to produce any evidence of due diligence having been done on $580,000. This is a miscarriage of justice, and Parliament is correct in saying the main man, the constitutional being, must stand in front of them to explain himself. And it is wrong for him to say he wants to take this thing on review. It can't be taken on review. There is something to answer, even if it was that only issue. And it can't be that they find fault with Ngcobo's panel. I mean, one time, in 2002, I was said to have stolen money, bought properties. I hadn't. When I got this document, I passed it on to Minister Manuel. I said, here's something saying something about me. I asked him a year later, I said, Minister, what do we do with this? Because it is saying something about myself. He said, go to Professor Sangweni. I went to Professor Sangweni. I said, Professor Sangweni, here is a document. It says I've stolen. Come investigate me. As a public officer, I should be investigated at all times. And I knew there was no truth in it. But when there's suspicion, I must be investigated because I hold public office.
Dr. Lehohla, I tell you what, I want to put a pause on our conversation because there's so much more that I actually want to interrogate with you. And unfortunately, you know, we're not going to have that time today. But can I please ask you, and we will check with you through the production team, if we can continue this conversation tomorrow morning, because the topic still remains topical and there's a lot more to unpack here. So we'll be in touch, we'll follow up with you, but I'm putting a pause on this. It's by no means the conclusion of this conversation.
Well, it's unraveling. Thank you very much.
That's a good choice of words. It's unraveling. Dr. Pali Lehohla, who is, of course, a former Statistician-General.